joining us now. James, live in Singapore. Thanks for being with us, sir.
A pleasure to be with you.
Excellent. James, I want to get first to the coronavirus. A lot of international figures lauding Singapore as an example. You guys have done a remarkable job in controlling the spread of COVID-19. How have you done that?
I think there are several factors. First of all, Singapore is probably, if not the foremost, one of the most forward-thinking governments that I can think of in terms of scenario planning. Second of all, it's a government that has performed over decades. This is a country with the highest home ownership in the world, 90%. So even if you're critical of the government, you're not going to rock the boat. With other words, there's a trust relationship. Mm-hmm. And third of all, the Singaporeans took the virus serious from day one. They have a phenomenal health system, and they acted immediately in terms of being able to not only quarantine people who had been affected or potentially were infected, but also tracing contacts. And that has worked very well. So in many ways, life in Singapore, unlike in Europe or parts of the United States, is not all that disrupted. For sure, increasingly people work from home. Public meetings above 250 people have been banned. Classes in universities above 50 people have been banned. But, restaurants are open, shops are open, people socialize. I'm at the moment at a friend's house for dinner. Life goes on as normal. Maybe, at least to me, the most disruptive factor is that I'm grounded. I can't travel, or I can travel, but when I come back to Singapore, I would automatically have to go into self-quarantine for 14 days, so I don't travel. But short of that, they've been able, given their systems, given the relationship between the public and the government, and given the institutions that they have, to manage this very well.
I tell you, that is good news. What can the U.S. learn from that experience in Singapore, James Dorsey?
I don't think there's anything you can learn short term, because by now things have gone too far. And therefore you can't simply try and apply what the Singaporeans did and resolve the crisis.
Right.
What I do think is that there is long term, there is a lot to learn from Singapore in terms of the structure of your health care, in terms of relationship between elected officials and the public, and the basis of confidence and trust that you need. So there is a lot to learn, but that's what you would learn is structural and is not an immediate Band-Aid solution.
James Dorsey, what we're going through right now in the United States, how is that being reported in Singapore media, James?
I think as it's being reported in much of the media elsewhere, basically, you have a president who not only wasn't recognizing what was happening, but was denying what was happening. And you, of course, have a president whose track record in transparency and accuracy is not one that inspires confidence. And I think that that's basically the prism through which people look at it. Obviously with compassion, because lots of people are suffering. People are going to die and are dying. But I think fundamentally they look at it as a failure of government and of governance.
Well, I know. Now we're in this lockdown scenario. The economy is tanking. You're not dealing with that in Singapore because you guys are so proactive. South Korea's as well. So now
economically, it's going to be felt. I mean, the prediction is that there's going to be a 5% recession.
Right.
And you're seeing cutbacks in various places. But I think that again, you're not going to see mass layoffs. And there was very early on a stimulus package to ensure that you didn't get an economic breakdown.
That makes sense. We're with James Dorsey. He's coming live from Singapore. James Dorsey is a senior fellow at the S. Roger Rutnam School of International Studies, and he's also Middle East Institute in Singapore. He's also a senior contributor with Inside Arabia. By the way, Inside Arabia is my choice. That's my site for all news in the Middle East. Go to InsideArabia.com. They're based right here in Washington, D.C. I get accurate information. I get great analysis. Speaking of great analysis, James Dorsey had a column up, which also inspired us to get in touch with you the other day. It said, Biden, Sanders, or Trump, U.S. policy towards the Gulf will change regardless in 2021. Can you elaborate on that, James?
Yeah, let me just correct one thing. I didn't say 2021. What I said and wrote was that the security architecture, by definition, will change. Mm-hmm. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, there's been a declining U.S. interest in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Going back, frankly, this precedes the Trump administration and goes back already to the Obama administration. Mm-hmm. The question there, of course, is that if the current oil crisis and the rock bottom oil prices knock out the U.S. shale industry, and therefore the United States would no longer be self-sufficient in its own energy production, as well as a major exporter, then dependency on the Middle East could increase, and therefore the interest could increase.
Right.
But assuming that the trend that we've seen since the Obama administration of reduced interest in the Middle East continues, then you're going to have to move towards a different security architecture. Add to that confidence in the United States as a guarantor for the security of the conservative energy-rich Gulf states has diminished significantly. Now, again, that started with the Obama administration and its support for the popular Arab revolts in 2011, as well as Obama's conclusion of a nuclear agreement with Iran.
Right.
But then if you go to Trump and you look at the last year, you had a series of attacks on Gulf states, including the attacks on oil tankers off the coast of the United Arab Emirates, and last September, the attack on two key Saudi oil facilities, to which the United States did not respond. And it did not respond to multiple attacks on U.S. facilities by Iranian proxies in Iraq. It only finally responded in January with the killing of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, which privately the Gulf celebrated because it was the death of a formidable enemy, but also was viewed politically as overkill. Mm-hmm. And so in that constellation, the Gulf states are going to hedge their bets. Now, you have a Russian plan on the table for a multilateral security arrangement that would involve the Chinese, the Russians, the Europeans, the Indians, but also the backbone militarily of it would have to be still the United States.
Right.
And that is a formula that probably is going to become increasingly popular because it allows the Gulf states to hedge its bets. It allows the United States to reduce its commitment and maybe even get paid, as Trump continuously demands, for its services, but it distributes the responsibility.
Okay, so what you're saying is the U.S. is moving towards a different security apparatus. Interest in the Middle East is waning, partially because of our now no longer dependent on the Middle East for sources of energy. We're now, of course, U.S. now a net energy exporter, James Dorsey, as you know. So that makes sense. I think the other thing you've got going here, the only thing I would disagree with you is I think if Biden wins, you could see a continuation of kind of where we are right now, because forget Sanders, he's not going to be the nominee now. But the other thing you've got going on here is you got to remember President Trump campaigned very vigorously, James, on getting out of these Middle Eastern entanglements. That's why he showed great restraint in not responding to the Iranian attacks of the oil tankers and of the two facilities in Saudi Arabia, because instinctively, and what he promised is he would get us out of there, not re-up it. So that's why I think he showed tremendous restraint. I think if you see Trump in his second term, and I think after we get through this virus crisis, I think he's going to win and win big. I agree with you. I see a continual dismantling of our security apparatus there. We're with James Dorsey. He's a senior fellow at Roger Rutnam School of International Studies and the Middle East Institute. He's based in Singapore. He's live in Singapore. He's a contributor with Inside Arabia. Go to InsideArabia.com, the number one website now and source of news and information on the Middle East that I go to every day. It's my daily partner. Go to InsideArabia.com. They're also based in Washington, D.C. So, James, tell us about the future of the Gang of Four embargo against the state of Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt. It's been a colossal economic disaster for Mohammed bin Salman. It's causing humanitarian crisis. Why does this go on? It served no objective. It's gotten nothing done. At what point do they just say, you know what, this hasn't worked, and get rid of it?
John, it's my turn to disagree with you. It's not causing an economic disaster. On the contrary, Qatar's proven to be very resilient, and it's doing fine with the boycott or without the boycott. I think the problem here is that you have in Saudi Arabia a leader, Mohammed bin Salman, and equally importantly, and maybe even more importantly, in the United Arab Emirates, a leader, Mohammed bin Zayed, who are determined to impose their will on the Middle East. And it doesn't matter at what cost they do that. That includes the failed attempt to force a change of prime minister in Lebanon. That includes the disastrous wars in Syria, in Yemen, and in Libya, and it includes the boycott of Qatar. The problem now is that the Saudis and the Emiratis, the Bahrainis and the Egyptians are really just followers. The players are the Saudis and the Emiratis. They're up a cul-de-sac. They're up a dead-end road. They have nailed themselves to a position that would, if the Qataris were ever to accept, and they will not accept, would mean that they would surrender their sovereignty and independence.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
And it's almost impossible for them to back down. Now, fact of the matter is that the Emiratis have started to hedge their bets. Mm-hmm. With the Iranian attacks on the oil tankers last year, mm-hmm. they have started to reach out to the Iranians. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they've returned money to the Iranians. Mm-hmm. They have sent a Coast Guard delegation to Tehran to discuss maritime security. And if you look at the coronavirus crisis, the Iranians could not get medical supplies, not because those supplies were sanctioned, but because people were afraid to deal with it. And the World Health Organization had to step in, and it was the Emiratis who facilitated those flights. And in recent days, again, it was the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis who have delivered supplies to Iran. So they're hedging their bets. The Iranians the Saudis following the attack on the oil facilities started an indirect dialogue with the Iranians. And in fact, when Soleimani was arriving in Baghdad on the day that he was killed in the U.S. strikes, he was carrying a message from the Iranian leadership to be transferred to the Saudis via the Iraqi government. Mm-hmm. The Saudis have since backed away from those talks. Not quite clear why, but presumably because they believe that the Americans were taking a more firmer stand. I think that needs that I wouldn't hold my breath on that. I'm not sure that is the case. But so what you saw again is an expression of this no longer having full confidence in the United States as an ally, and therefore a need to try and plan for a different future.
One point of clarification, when I said economic disaster, I really meant for the Saudis, not for the state of Qatar that actually has benefited economically from the embargo, but it's hurt the Saudis financially because a lot of the trade they had with Qatar they no longer have. Let me just ask you this.
If I can
yes.
make one remark on that.
Yes.
I don't think that, what is having real financial consequences for Saudi Arabia is the oil price war.
Right.
The Saudis need about $80 a barrel to balance their budget. $25 a barrel doesn't do it. And of course, the economic and financial impact of the virus. Saudi Arabia is basically, like most other countries, closed itself off from the outside world. The Qatar's financial contribution to the crisis or to the Saudi economy is minimal. What's much more important is that a city like Dubai, a city-state like Dubai, is wholly dependent on Qatari gas, and the Qataris never cut off the gas.
Right. They could have easily done that, but they never did that because they take a longer view. Like that's one of the reasons they've been so successful. I think we can agree on that. But when does MBZ and the Emiratis, when does he just say, I've been dealing with Mohammed bin Salman now. He's now in the middle of this crisis. He's putting more people in jail. We have the Khashoggi episode. We've got this disastrous war in Yemen with the Houthis. We're spending billions of dollars to Iranians, millions. We're blowing up school buses. At what point does MBZ, who I think is the savvier of the two of them, just realize that he's dealing with somebody in KSA that is basically incompetent? When does that happen?
It's not. It's not going to happen.
Why?
For a few reasons. First of all, Mohammed bin Zayed has no problem with putting people in jail. He does it himself. And you don't want to be in an Emirati jail. That's one. Two, Mohammed bin Zayed has long thought of the Saudi leadership, certainly the Saudi leadership prior to the rise of Mohammed bin Salman, as a bunch of cantankerous old men who believe that the world is flat. That's what he told a U.S. diplomat years ago. He is obsessed with the threat of political Islam, which he identifies with terrorism. Mm-hmm. And so he, from day one, and his ambassador in Washington, Yusuf al-Otaiba, have held Mohammed bin Salman out as the future. Mm-hmm. A younger generation, less tied to the ultra-conservative interpretation of Islam that is prevalent in Saudi Arabia, mm-hmm. willing to economically reform while rejecting any form of political liberalization, mm-hmm. and a strategy whereby Mohammed bin Zayed understood that he rules a small country, mm-hmm. but if he can work through the court of a powerful country or a powerful monarchy, then there's a lot that he can achieve, and that's exactly what he has been doing.
Well, then, masterfully so. Great analysis. We're out of time. I want to thank James Dorsey for being with us. Great segment, James. We're going to have you back. Look, I appreciate you making time. I know it's about 10 p.m. where you are now. Senior Fellow, S. Roger Rutnam School of International Studies and Middle East Institute, live in Singapore, and a senior contributor with Inside Arabia, and a great writer. Go to InsideArabia.com for more information. You can read his stuff there. Brilliant guy, InsideArabia.com. My source for Middle East news and information, InsideArabia.com, based in Washington, D.C. Hey, James, thanks for being with us. Thanks for making time.
Thank you for having me.